The metallic screech of the subway echoed through the station as the train slowed to a stop. Rush hour in the city was merciless. Bodies pushing, elbows colliding, exhausted commuters shoving their way inside before the doors could fully open. Maya Thompson held her breath as people rushed past her, gripping her stomach as she carefully stepped onto the train. At 8 months pregnant, this was getting harder by the day. She had been on her feet for hours, and every movement felt 10 times heavier. Her lower back ached, her feet were swollen, and every sudden jolt of the train sent a dull ache through her belly. She needed a seat, desperately. Her eyes scanned the train, moving from row to row. Nothing. Every seat was taken, some by elderly passengers, some by tired workers, and others by people who had clearly decided to pretend they didn't see her. Maya sighed, swallowing the frustration. Then she saw it. A priority seat. Clearly marked with a bright yellow foul sign. Priority seating for elderly, disabled, and pregnant passengers. But it wasn't available. A woman in a transit conductor uniform stood in front of it, blocking it completely. Betty Lou Henderson. Tall, broad-shouldered, a face permanently etched with disapproval. Her graying auburn hair was twisted into a severe bun, and she stood with her arms crossed, like a queen surveying her territory. Maya hesitated. She had seen Betty Lou before. She was the worst kind of person to have authority. The kind who used rules to punish, not to protect. The kind who enjoyed exerting power just for the sake of it. But Maya had no choice. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm pregnant. Could I sit down, please?" Betty Lou barely glanced at her. Instead, she let out a low scoff and shifted her stance slightly, but made no effort to move. "The train's crowded," she muttered. "Find another seat." Maya blinked. Did she really just say that? She gestured to the priority sign directly above Betty Lou's head. "This seat is reserved for people like me." Betty Lou finally turned her head, her cold eyes raking over Maya like she was an inconvenience. Then she smirked, a slow, deliberate smirk. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Being pregnant doesn't mean you get to cut in line." A hush fell over the train. Passengers who had been pretending not to listen suddenly perked up. Some exchanged nervous glances. Others, trained by years of subway etiquette, kept their heads down. Maya's stomach tightened, not from the baby, but from anger. She exhaled slowly, keeping her voice measured. "Ma'am," she said, firm but even, "this seat is reserved for those who need it. I'm not asking for special treatment. I need to sit down." Betty Lou let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "You're standing just fine," she mocked. "If you can argue, you can stand." A murmur rippled through the train. A man across the aisle frowned, looking from Maya to Betty Lou. A woman, a few seats away, shifted uncomfortably. But no one spoke up. No one ever did. Maya clenched her jaw. This wasn't about a seat anymore. This was about power. And Betty Lou had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The train lurched forward, sending Maya off balance for a split second. She gripped the pole tightly, her back screaming in pain. But Betty Lou? She just stood there, watching, waiting, enjoying this. Passengers stole glances at Maya, some looking guilty, others uneasy. A few shifted in their seats, but nobody moved to help. Nobody ever wanted to get involved. Maya inhaled sharply. Fine. If nobody was going to step up, she'd have to do it herself. She looked Betty Lou directly in the eye. "Ma'am, let me ask you something," she said, her voice loud enough for others to hear. Betty Lou raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "What?" Maya gestured around the train. "How many people do you think are watching this right now?" A few heads snapped up. Betty Lou's smirk faltered just slightly. But Maya wasn't done. "How many people do you think have their phones out?" A few passengers shifted awkwardly. A man near the door was definitely recording. Betty Lou's face twitched. "I don't care if they're watching." Maya tilted her head. "You sure about that?" For the first time, Betty Lou hesitated. For the first time, she realized this wasn't going to end the way she thought it would. A voice cut through the tension. "She's right." Maya turned. A man in his 40s, dressed in a business suit, leaned forward. "She's pregnant. You need to let her sit." Betty Lou's smirk vanished. A woman with glasses shook her head. "I don't know what kind of power trip you're on, but this is a bad look." Betty Lou's eyes flickered with something new, uncertainty. Maya folded her arms. "So what's it gonna be? Are you really about to double down on this while half the train is watching?" A few more passengers pulled out their phones, recording, capturing every moment. Betty Lou noticed. Her jaw tightened. The train lurched forward again, but this time something had changed. The energy inside the car felt different, like a storm waiting to break. Betty Lou Henderson stood her ground, arms still crossed, but her confidence wasn't as solid as before. Passengers were watching now, and they weren't just watching. They were judging. The hushed whispers had grown louder. The stolen glances had turned into open stares. Maya felt it first. It wasn't just about her anymore. People were turning on Betty Lou because, for once, they had a chance to push back. A deep voice cut through the silence. "This is wrong." Maya turned, surprised. A middle-aged black man sitting near the doors had his arms folded. His expression was firm, his tone dead serious. He gestured at Betty Lou. "You're really gonna let a pregnant woman stand for this whole ride?" Betty Lou's smirk returned, but it was weaker now. "I enforce the rules," she said, raising her chin. "This train's full. She can wait." A woman across the aisle snorted. "Full?" She rolled her eyes. "You're literally blocking an empty seat." Betty Lou's face twitched. Maya saw it. For the first time, cracks were forming. A younger woman near the window, barely in her 20s, shook her head. "Why are you making this a thing? She's pregnant. Just let her sit." Betty Lou wasn't used to this. She was used to shutting people down. She was used to people being too tired to fight. But today was different. Then, the real danger. A passenger near the back, a teenage boy with earbuds in, lifted his phone. He had been recording the entire time, and he wasn't alone. Maya spotted at least 3 other people, subtly angling their phones toward Betty Lou. The realization hit the conductor at the same time. Her confidence wavered. Her shoulders stiffened. Maya knew what she was thinking. This wasn't just a minor argument anymore. This was about to go viral. A woman near the priority seats let out a heavy sigh. This is embarrassing. She looked at Betty Lou with nothing but disappointment. A man in a suit next to her nodded. It's actually shocking. A train conductor is the one breaking the rules. Passengers murmured in agreement. The tide had turned. Maya didn't need to argue anymore. The train was handling it for her. And then Betty Lou did something she never did. She took a step back. Not much. Just enough for Maya to see the flicker of doubt in her face. She was realizing something. She wasn't the one in control anymore. But she still wasn't ready to let go. Instead, she tried to salvage her authority. She turned to the teenage boy, recording. Put that phone away, or I'll... You'll what? The boy cut in. A shockwave went through the train. Betty Lou froze. The question hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been said. Because the truth was, she couldn't do anything. The rules weren't on her side anymore. The passengers weren't on her side. And whether she liked it or not, she was losing. The train slowed into the next station. The doors slid open, and someone important stepped inside. Someone who was about to make things worse for Betty Lou. The train rumbled forward, but inside, the real storm was brewing. Maya didn't move. Betty Lou didn't budge. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed against them. Phones were recording. Passengers were whispering. The power in the train was shifting, and Betty Lou felt it. She had spent years treating people like this, pushing her weight around, humiliating passengers, using her uniform like a shield. And now, for the first time, she was on the other side. But she wasn't about to back down. She doubled down, and it got ugly. Betty Lou's jaw clenched, her knuckles white from gripping the rail too tight. She looked at Maya, really looked at her, not just as a passenger, but as a target. Her face twisted with something dark, something bitter. Then, she took a step forward, closer to Maya. Maya didn't flinch. She held Betty Lou's stare, refusing to let this woman see even a flicker of fear. But then, Betty Lou spoke, and the train went dead silent. You people always want something handed to you. A collective gasp rippled through the train car. Maya felt her stomach drop. The mask was gone. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was bigger, and everyone knew it. Manuel near the front stood up so fast his bag nearly fell. You people? He repeated, voice sharp. A woman near the doors let out a disgusted scoff. Did she really just say that? Passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from Maya to Betty Lou. Even the ones who had stayed quiet were now shaking their heads. The woman sitting across from Maya, the one who had first spoken up, leaned forward. Her voice was low but dangerous. Oh, honey, you just ended your whole career? Betty Lou bristled. Her eyes flickered to the phones, to the watching faces, to the judgment hanging heavy in the air. She was losing them. She was losing everything, and it made her furious. You think you deserve special treatment just because you got yourself knocked up? Betty Lou spat, voice full of venom. Maya stilled. The entire train stilled. The silence was thick, suffocating, deadly. The businessman near the door let out a stunned laugh. Oh, you're done. A teenage girl recording on her phone whispered under her breath. Oh, this is about to blow up. Maya's chest tightened. Not from fear, not from shock, but from rage. She had dealt with this type of woman her entire life. The kind who saw black women as less. The kind who thought power gave them the right to degrade people. The kind who thought the world belonged to them, and she was sick of it. Maya took a slow, deliberate step closer to Betty Lou. Then she smiled. And that was what made Betty Lou falter. Because Maya wasn't scared. She wasn't crying. She wasn't breaking. She was winning. And Betty Lou knew it. The train slowed into the next station. The doors slid open with a soft chime. And that's when he stepped in. A man in a sharp navy blue suit. Tall, commanding, someone important. Maya didn't recognize him at first, but Betty Lou did. And for the first time all night, she went pale. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Because standing in front of her, watching everything unfold, was her boss. And he had heard everything. The moment stretched too long, the air too thick. The entire train held its breath. And then he spoke, in a voice cold as steel. Betty Lou. The train stopped moving, and so did Betty Lou's career. The train stopped, but inside, the tension only grew. The man in the navy blue suit stood just inside the doorway, the crisp lines of his tailored jacket unshaken by the chaos around him. His gaze was cold, unreadable, but his presence alone changed everything. Passengers who had been murmuring, judging, re-intending, they all went silent. Even Betty Lou, who had spent the past 10 minutes acting untouchable, had suddenly lost all color in her face. She knew. She knew exactly who he was. But the real question was, did she know just how much trouble she was in? Betty Lou opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time since this started, she looked nervous. She swallowed. Hard. The man took a single step forward, his polished shoes tapping against the floor, deliberate and slow. Then in a voice that cut through the air like a blade, he repeated himself. Betty Lou. She flinched. Passengers exchanged glances. Phones were still recording, every single second. And for the first time, Maya saw something in Betty Lou she hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not power, not control. Fear. Betty Lou forced herself to straighten up, gripping onto whatever authority she had left. She cleared her throat, her voice tight. "Sir, this passenger..." She gestured at Maya, her hand shaking slightly. "Is causing a disruption. I was just trying to keep order." Maya let out a short, humorless laugh. Disruption? This woman had spent the last 10 minutes humiliating her, refusing to let her sit, and making sure everyone knew exactly how she felt about people like her. And now she wanted to play the victim. The businessman who had spoken earlier rolled his eyes. "Oh, this is rich." A woman near the doors muttered, "This lady has no shame." Betty Lou pretended not to hear. She kept talking. Her words rushed now, like she was desperate to get ahead of the storm. "Sir, you know how people like this can be," she added, forcing out a nervous chuckle. The air shifted. A slow, heavy realization settled over the train. And then he spoke. The man's voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it, just a sharp, cutting authority that left no room for argument. "People like what, Betty Lou?" The words landed like a slap. Betty Lou's breath hitched. She froze, staring at him as if she'd just walked into her own grave. Maya watched it click in her eyes. This wasn't just a supervisor she was dealing with. This wasn't just a higher-up. This was her boss. And he was giving her just enough rope to hang herself. The train was silent. Everyone waited. Phones were still recording. Betty Lou's mouth opened and closed, but there was nothing she could say. She had exposed herself. And now, there was no saving her. The man let the silence stretch, his eyes locked on Betty Lou like he was watching something rot. Then he exhaled, shook his head once, and said 6 words that ended her career. "You are officially relieved of duty." A shockwave ripped through the train. Passengers gasped, and some let out low whistles. A man near the doors let out a stunned, "Damn." Maya's jaw tightened. She had expected something to happen. But this was justice unfolding in real time. "And Betty Lou," she snapped. "You can't do this to me," Betty Lou shouted, voice high-pitched and desperate. The passengers stared, watching the exact moment where she realized her power was gone. She turned to Maya, as if this was all her fault. "Are you happy now?" she spat. "You people." A deep voice cut her off. "Shut up, lady." The businessman near the window. Betty Lou's mouth fell open, but he wasn't alone. A woman near the back shook her head. "No one feels bad for you. You did this to yourself," another added. A young black girl near the door muttered, "Welcome to consequences." Betty Lou's breath was ragged. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She was supposed to be untouchable. She was supposed to be in control. But now, she was just another racist woman caught in 4K, and the whole world was about to see it. Betty Lou's shoulders heaved with anger. She spun back toward her boss, her last shred of hope clinging to her tone. "Sir, I was just trying to enforce the rules. The man finally turned his head toward Maya, and for the first time, his expression softened, just a fraction. Then he spoke. His words crushed Betty Lou completely. "Are you all right, Maya?" The train stopped breathing. Maya froze. Passengers exchanged shocked glances. Betty Lou stumbled back. "What?" Her voice shook. The businessman near the window let out a low whistle. "Oh, hell no." A teenage boy recording muttered, "Oh my God. That's her dad." Betty Lou looked like she'd been hit by a truck. She stared at Maya, then back at her boss, realization hitting her too late. She had just harassed, humiliated, and tried to throw off the train. The daughter of the man who ran the entire transit system, and there was no undoing it. Betty Lou's lips trembled. I didn't know. But the man just shook his head, his tone final, merciless. You didn't need to know. The doors slid shut. The train rumbled forward. And Betty Lou, she had just lost everything. The train clattered forward, but inside the car, it felt like the world had stopped moving. Maya's father, the regional transit director, stood with his gaze locked on Betty Lou Henderson, the woman who had just humiliated his pregnant daughter in front of an entire train of people. Betty Lou was frozen. The weight of what she had done was now suffocating her. She had spent years enforcing rules her own way, twisting her authority to belittle and control. But now she had picked a fight with the wrong person. And the worst part, she had no idea she had been digging her own grave the entire time. But she knew now, and it was too late. The passengers who had once been silent bystanders were now fully engaged. They had seen it all, from Betty Lou's cruel words to her desperate attempts to hold on to power. Now, they were enjoying the show. A young woman with curly hair let out a low chuckle. She really tried it, she whispered to her friend, and she picked the wrong damn family. An older black woman shook her head in disappointment. The way she was treating that girl, I hope she never gets another job again. A teenage boy still recording grinned. Yo, this is better than TV. The train wasn't just against Betty Lou anymore. They were watching her fall, and they were loving every second of it. Maya's father exhaled slowly, looking at Betty Lou like she was nothing more than a problem to be dealt with. Then in a voice that left no room for debate, he spoke. Betty Lou, you're getting off at the next stop. Betty Lou snapped out of her trance, her head jerked up, wild-eyed, desperate. Sir, please, I didn't know. I was just... He cut her off with a single sharp look. This has nothing to do with knowing, he said coldly. This is about the way you treat people when you think no one is watching. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Betty Lou's lip quivered. Maya's father didn't blink. You are done here. Betty Lou staggered back, eyes darting from Maya to her father, still trying to salvage something. Please, sir, I've been working for this company for 20 years. You can't do this to me. Her voice was cracking, pleading now. Maya folded her arms. You had 20 years to learn how to treat people with basic respect. You wasted them. Passengers murmured in agreement. An older man near the back muttered, She thought she was untouchable. A woman near the doors shook her head. Not anymore. Betty Lou turned back to Maya's father, her last hope. I made a mistake, she whispered. His expression was stone cold. No, you made a choice. Betty Lou's breath hitched. The train began slowing down. The next stop was coming. Her stop. And she knew it. Ding! Next stop. The train pulled into the station. The doors slid open. All eyes were on Betty Lou. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The humiliation was complete. A voice rang out, someone in the back, mocking. Get off the train, lady. Laughter followed. Betty Lou's face burned. Her hands clenched into fists. She turned to Maya one last time, hatred in her eyes. Maya just smiled. "You heard him," she said. "Get off the train." With her career in tatters, her reputation shredded, and the weight of dozens of judgmental stares pressing down on her, Betty Lou Henderson stepped off the train. She barely made it onto the platform before the doors slid shut behind her. A young man near the back let out a sharp whistle. "Good riddance." Passengers laughed, shook their heads, whispered. She had spent years humiliating others. And now, it was her turn. As the train pulled away, Maya turned to her father. "Thank you," she said softly. He met her gaze and gave a small nod. "No," he said. "Thank you." Because today, justice had been served, and the city would never forget it.